Well, friends, the most tedious of circumstance, which is for your job traveling. I'm abroad and, solitary, and I'm a solitary person by nature. Nevertheless, this is, I am nonplussed by the circumstances of this hotel. So, in describing my doctrine to a friend of mine, a good one, who is a religious person and a Christian, there was some offense taken by my casual dismissal of the existence of God, which is my preface to my actual doctrine, which is that a God must be created. And so I had to actually give this some thought. I was taken aback. I come from like a more philosophical circle in which you can speak with in generalizations and talk about the non-existence of God without rankling anybody or raising offense. That's not, which again is not ever my intention. I'm trying to make a religion. I want to appeal to people. I'm trying to improve the world. So, in my isolated dinner at the fucking sports bar, I made some notes. So this is going to be hopefully a more direct and sensible, coherent. This is intended, friends, as a more coherent exposition about the thesis that I want to present. Now, I have to raise my hand as I do this so that you have a constant and perfect view of the drab and dreary hotel room. So, the abolition of the real. What is actual? What is actual is by nature inadequate. That you have to concede. That what is real, if you compare the real to the spiritual. What is spiritual is timeless, it's eternal, and it is focused, and it's a story. It's a tale that is told by one to another, and it's retold, and it's reiterated, and it has versions. And every story has a point. There's narrative focus and an element of, it's a story. There's a climax and a conclusion. Real life doesn't have that. The real, right? It's bound by time. It lacks that timeless quality. It's not eternal. It's constantly changing and always in flux. It is ephemeral, right? Nothing living can long survive. That's the nature of life, is that it is not lasting. It is impermanent and fundamentally meaningless. The only true biological success is to procreate, to pass this curse of existence on to another generation, to force somebody else to experience all the pain, suffering, and joy and sorrow that you have experienced. But that is what it is to be alive. And that's the culmination of being alive, is to compel somebody else to be alive, to force that on them, quite against their will, perhaps. And life itself it lacks the properties of a proper story. It doesn't have a coherent climax, nor any narrative arc or threads. Instead, things just happen chaotically, randomly, and without reason. It lacks the cohesion that a story has. The story is what's told about life after the fact. So the spiritual exists by virtue of its unreality. What isn't real can be perfect. What is real can never be so. The spiritual work, then, is to create more of the spiritual work. In my opinion, it is to create greater and more narrative. It is to invent ideas, foment fantasy, and embed that in the minds of others to create a spiritual existence outside of the real that is always and fully, fundamentally inadequate and meaningless. The story gives life meaning. The story that we tell each other about our lives, what we experience, only has meaning when it is recapitulated in the form of a story, which can carry meaning forward. Again, the unreal is the source of meaning, is the source of understanding, is the source of the soul. Spiritual work is to create more of it, to carry forward the stories of us, all of us, to build the soul that contains all of our spirits, just as evolution bounds our physiology. We can consider the story, the narrative, those tales is somehow bounding our spiritual existence. And we can think of nature as all of its bonds, all of its control, all of its exertion against your will, against the will of any living thing, right? No living creature abides by its own will. It survives by its will, but is compelled by the will of every other thing in nature. There's no succor given. And what peace can be derived is derived through violence, through superior violence. But in retrospect, the story can be retold and explain what has been experienced and give it value, give it a spiritual strength, give it a meaning that makes the suffering valid and valuable and not just bad luck and pointless. So, but at the same time, right, you suffer pointlessly. Life lacks meaning. It is torment and accomplishes nothing. Nevertheless, you can tell stories about it. You can invigorate it with a spiritual identity, with a story that validates you, validates others, that gives meaning to that suffering, and makes it more than it is, makes it unreal. Because the unreal can be perfect, whereas the real can never be. So, we have friends, I know people, and I speak to them and I say, well, there's no such thing as a God. It's not real. And that's offensive to them in a meaningful way. And to me, this is symbolic of them lacking a good spiritual understanding, because what is real can never be great, can never be perfect. Only the unreal can be perfect. And we as humans have the capacity to imagine the unreal. So we must, it's not a matter of what we should do. We must revel in this. We must carry it forward and tell more stories about greater and better things. So I've been speculating on a hypothesis, as it's sometimes said. Well, think of the cicadas, right? They spend their entire existence outside of your experience, beneath just existing, doing their confusing work. And then they emerge as basically the reproductive organ of their species to persist briefly and to replicate themselves. And the mushroom is, again, the fruiting body of this mycelial rhizome that exists outside of sight. And so you have to think about these weird and unknown seasons, like the Milankovitch cycles or glaciation periods. These seasons that are outside of the human lifespan and thus outside of the human experience. So what is it? Again, What is real can never be perfect. You can only imagine perfect things, but there's an infinite variety of the perfect things that could be imagined. So I share with you an imaginary idea. What if the existence of a God is predicated by the existence of a civilization? Something that can bear its weight and manifest a belief within it to form a coherent idea, a spiritual essence that persists as a story outside of the existence of that civilization. And the civilization now is the soil, and the fruiting body that emerges from that soil is this God. And what if that passes from planet to planet? What if that is the life cycle that we participate in without knowing? To imagine a God and to manifest it as real via the work of civilization, only to be passed over and allow that God to traverse whatever space and time, non-existence, the liminal space of thought itself. What if that is our role in that life cycle? To develop consciousness sufficient to create a God. This has been one of my more esoteric thoughts, and I have few regrets concerning it. I am happy to have thought these things. Alone in a hotel out of town, far from anything you know or care about, these are the thoughts that should guide you. I preach on this as a virtue. Imagine harder while you're alone, and irrevocably so. Thank you for your time and attention. This has been a message of hope.